We open today's show with one question. How much would you be willing to risk to stand up for what you believe in? I'm Anelise Borges, and this is The Stream.
Growing up in a very militarized society, I was always against violence, and I always did not want to be the one pointing the gun at people. There's this cycle of violence in this land that someone has to stop. Soon my military draft date will come up and I will refuse service, and I'm ready to bear with those consequences of refusing service. I am not threatened by military prison, military jail. I'm fully ready to face what they bring on.
That was what Tal Mitnick told us back in December. He's a conscientious objector, part of a small group of young people in Israel who refuse to serve in the military on moral grounds. Days after that interview, Tal was sent to prison for not enlisting. Now, a month later, he is out, but probably not for long. And today, we have Tal with us again here on The Stream. Tal, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, how are you? What has this past month in prison been like for you?
I mean, it's not easy by any means. I mean, you're locked up and your freedom is taken away from you, and you're put in an environment where there's no one really to talk to about any of my beliefs or my values, and it feels like I'm really only with myself in there. But I was able to stay strong through letters from friends and people that supported me from Israel and around the world. And my family visited me a couple times. So the first 30 days, I think I handled it pretty well. And when I'm out, it's really amazing to see all the support that I've really gotten in Israel and around the world. So I'm staying strong, and I'm going to go in again, and hopefully it'll stay this way.
For those unfamiliar with your beliefs, could you explain again why you refused to enlist? And has this time in prison done anything to change that?
So the reason I refuse to take part in the Israeli military is I refuse to take part in any system that uses violence as a means to solve problems. And I believe Israel uses its military in that way, has been using it for 70 plus years. And I believe this recent, after the terrorist attack on October 7th, instead of stopping the cycle of bloodshed, instead of stopping the violence, the Israeli military only continued the violence and opened and went on a revenge war in Gaza, not against Hamas, but against Palestinian civilians. And while I was in prison, not just that nothing almost changed my mind, I feel even more that I could never take part in this system.
Well, your courage has inspired many people. We asked our online community if they had questions for you. Amanda had this to ask. Take a look.
Hello, Tal Mitnick. This is Amanda from Indonesia, and I would like to ask you, were you threatened when you refused to serve in the IDF? What were the threats, and how did you respond to it?
What would you say to Amanda, Tal? What was the response? What has the response been to your refusal to enlist in the military?
So the mainstream media did not really pick up on my refusal because it's very supportive of the war, and they don't want to show any dissenting opinion. But TikTok sites like TikTok and Twitter and non-mainstream kind of sources were covering my refusal, painting me obviously as a traitor. And I got messages to my WhatsApp and to my Instagram and threats. But these people aren't real. I mean, they are real, but they're not talking to me face to face, and I don't really feel threatened by them.
You were sentenced to 30 days in prison, and you mentioned that if you refuse to enlist again, you will be sent back to jail. Can you tell us how this works and what do you expect to happen next?
So when they let you out of prison from your sentence, they give you another enlistment date. Because I had most people, they give them a date that they have to go to their base, back to their unit. And for me, I got another enlistment date. My next enlistment date is this Monday. And I'm going to go there and refuse service again and get sentenced to probably another 30 days, but we'll see.
So that means you could be away from your family, from your friends again for perhaps another 30 days. Doesn't that frighten you?
I feel like if I pass it once, I can pass it again, and it's going to be hard. I'm going to miss my family very much. But I know they support me, and I know that my friends support me. Yeah, it'll be fine.
Here's another member of our online community that sent a question, this time on Instagram. Let's have a listen to what she says.
Hi, I'm Leanne from Singapore. Firstly, I'd like to thank Tal and all the brave Israeli youths who refuse to serve in the Israeli Defense Force. My question is, what do you envision for Israelis and Palestinians in the future? Thank you.
Tal, can you tell us what your vision is for Palestine and Israel in the future?
I think that there's no other option except for living together. In no imagination of the world, of the future, can I imagine this place without Israelis. And in no imagination of this world can I imagine this place without Palestinians. I think at some point, people are going to have to learn to live one by each other, alongside. And we have to start working towards that. We have to be the voice that says we need to start this now and not in another 20, 30 years when so many more people are going to be dead.
Finally, what would you say to other Israelis who have their draft date coming up? Do you have a message or, I don't know, an advice?
Sometimes we can see ourselves as that we don't really matter, that it doesn't really matter what we do, and that if we enlist or not enlist, it's not really going to end the occupation. It's not going to bring this future of peace and equality. But I think it's really important to think about what our decisions mean and what we are doing with our decisions. And we have this test that we have in Israel when we turn 18, we have this draft, which puts all citizens at a test of, are you willing to take part in this? And I think it's really important that we think, that people think, and other teens think, if they are willing to take part in this.
Thank you so much for joining us today again, Tal. We really appreciate your time, and we'll obviously continue to follow your story very, very closely. I'd like to bring in now two other guests into the show. Einat Gerlitz, who's also a conscientious objector and spent time in prison last year, and Nave Shabtay Levin, who refused to serve on moral grounds and spent 115 days in prison. Thank you both so much for joining the stream today. We really appreciate having you guys here. Einat, let me start with you. Why did you decide not to enlist, and how did that decision impact your life?
So I decided not to enlist in the army because I didn't want to take part in the occupation, and because I felt like I couldn't possibly be part of a violent body such as an army. Actually, in the beginning, I did think that I'm gonna serve like most of the Israeli Jewish kids. That's how I grew up. But in high school, I met Palestinians that are Israeli citizens, and we became friends, and that really opened up my mind. But otherwise, I don't know if I would have had the information young enough to be able to refuse.
Nave, what about you? What is your story?
So, for me, also in high school, I kind of started high school with thinking that I will enlist to the army. But then as I grew my political awareness and I started to see the reality of the occupation, I realized that not only I refuse to take any part of the military that is ongoing the occupation, I have to do everything within my power to try and bring a better tomorrow. So that's why I decided to not only not take part of the army, but to refuse.
It's obviously a very difficult decision with big implications for you guys. One of our viewers had asked Tal if he received a lot of hate for resisting conscription. Did you guys receive hate? I mean, maybe if you can tell us a bit about how your family and your friends reacted to your decision. Einat, you go first.
Yeah, it was tough. Like some of my family members supported, and some it was very tough for them. I have a grandpa who fought in many of the biggest wars, and it's very tough when you come and question the most basic things that you're taught about the society that you live in, and questioning and saying that perhaps Palestinian lives have the same value as Israeli lives, and that and it was very hard for them to hear that. That I don't want to be part of the military. I didn't receive any threats, thank God, but like outside, but inside of prison, I had a few incidents that I was threatened by other inmates.
Really? Can you tell us a bit more? Can you share a little bit more about what kind of threats you received?
It was there were a few situations that that girls that sat with me that were serving their service was in the occupied territories, and I think and sitting in prison. I don't remember what the reason was, but they were very frustrated in general about the system, and they were really mad. I think that I represented something for them. It wasn't just me as Einat. That like the things that we as leftists in Israel are very used to, calling us traitors, and saying that we're selfish or that we don't care. So usually I would continue a conversation when I was in prison, but in those situations I just took a step back and let them cool off by themselves.
Was that the hardest part for you in prison? Would you say that that was the hardest part for you in prison? Were there other aspects of being jailed that were more difficult than that?
It is difficult. The discipline in the women's prison is very tough. It was very difficult being 87 days in that place, and having your freedom taken away from you is something that you can't explain to someone who hasn't experienced it. But at the end of the day, I really tried to use my privilege that when I was sitting inside, my family was worried about me and they supported me at the end of the day. And I tried to use that privilege for those others who cannot afford a public refusal, and I think the most important thing to remember is that no matter how tough it was for me, the setting in the administrative detention that Palestinians sit in is completely different, and it's way more tough. And at the end of the day, I did it for a better future for all of us here.
Nave, what about you? Was it difficult to tell your family and your friends about not enlisting, and how were your days in prison? You spent 115 days in a military prison.
Yeah, that's right. So obviously telling my community, my family and my friends that I'm going to prison because I refused to join the army, it was a very tough conversation to have, because refusing to the military is a very alienating decision, because the army is in the heart of the Israeli society. So when I refused, it's like I told my family and my friends that I'm in a way not like them. I come from a very militaristic family. My father is an orphan of war. So coming to my family, to my father's side of the family, and telling them that I am going to refuse to conscientiously object, it was very difficult for them. However, I am very privileged that I can say that despite the very strong disagreement that my family has with my decision to object, to refuse, I was given a lot of support from both my family, and my friends.
Wow. And can you tell us briefly what kind of situation you encountered once you were in detention? What was the hardest part for you?
So to me, the hardest part of the whole imprisonment was the fact that I had no idea when will I get my exemption, when will I stop having to go to prison, because there is no procedure to how many days will refusnik will sit in prison, and you're being imprisoned again and again and again. So to me, the hardest part was
not knowing
simply
not knowing how long that torture was going to last. I would like to bring a question from another viewer, because both of you mentioned something very interesting. You mentioned that the military is basically one of the most basic things about society, and that the army is in the heart of Israeli society. The question is, what are Israeli kids taught about Palestine in their schools? How do teachers and the schools justify the segregation that we see in the West Bank to them, for example? Einat, would you say that that is part of the problem, that you are basically brought up in this context of occupation and is just normalized?
For sure, I think it's the main problem. It's the basis of the problem. Growing up as an Israeli Jew, you can grow up and not feel that there's an occupation at all. There's like, when you live inside the 48 borders, you don't feel that there's an occupation. You walk in the streets in Tel Aviv, and you don't feel like there's an occupation at all. Once in a few years there is a war, but the word occupation isn't even in the public sphere. It's not even talked about. It's not a word that's mentioned in schools. In schools we're mentioned that that Israel occupied and won in the wars, and took back land, and those kinds of things. And the first interaction that the Israeli Jews have with the Palestinians of the West Bank is usually in their military service. So when you grow up, it's only what you're taught, and we're not taught the word Palestine or Palestinians as a nation. We're more taught to say Arab Israelis, the Arabs, as a nation, and not talked about the Palestinian nationality even at all. And Israelis don't know what the word Nakba means when they're young. But on the other hand, Palestinians, of course, can't not feel the occupation. They feel it in every second. And Palestinians that are Israeli citizens and that grow up in Israeli schools, they are taught about the 48 war from the Israeli perspective, and they're taught about the Holocaust, but we as Israeli Jews aren't talked about the Nakba at all, or the occupation, or what it actually means, and what's going on in the West Bank. In the maps that you see at school, it's all part of the same country. It's called Judea and Shomron, and it's just another area. That's how it's portrayed to students.
You bring in some very interesting points to this conversation. I wanted to ask you guys about the Hamas attack on October 7th. It obviously sent shockwaves through Israel, through the society. Do you think that this has changed the views of some people, for example, like you guys, who were questioning some of the policies that Israel was putting forward? Would you say that it has done that for you, for example, Nave?
Well, so for me, it didn't change my perspective on the occupation and on the importance of the pursuit of peace. It only made it clearer. But there is a phenomenon in the Israeli left that a lot of people are saying that they sobered up from believing in peace, and they sobered up because of the Hamas attack, because it was a very shocking and like a terrifying thing to
So
to
you would
observe,
say
to
it
watch.
affected this whole peace movement?
Yeah, definitely.
I would like to bring in now a very different but complementary perspective to this conversation, a video from Michael Peled, who is an Israeli-American activist who did serve in the Israeli military in the 1980s, but now regrets his time in the army. Take a look.
Then what I know now, I would have refused, and in fact I do regret that I did serve in the IDF. It is probably my greatest regret. The environment in which I was raised, the people around me, refusal was not ever discussed. It was not an option, even though I was raised in a kind of liberal Zionist environment, very, very Zionist, although liberal leaning. The option to refuse, although it did cross my mind, I really didn't have anybody with whom to share it and anybody who would encourage me to do that, and so I didn't. And again, I'll say this again, my hat's off to those who refuse to serve today. I think it's a very important service to the cause to refuse to serve in the IDF. Without any question, it's a glorified terrorist organization.
Einat, your thoughts here. I mean, are you guys still, would you say, a small group refusing to serve, or do you sense that there is a new trend and more voices perhaps being educated and actually coming forward to say that they don't want to be part of this?
Coming forward and saying that you don't want to be part of the military in Israel is always very, very, very tough, and especially during times of war. So we don't hear many voices, and I think thank God that we have Tal, and he's very, very brave for choosing to refuse, especially at a time of war. It's very difficult and can take a big price from him. But unfortunately, we don't have the numbers of the people that refuse. The army doesn't release the numbers of the conscientious refusers that refuse each year. So we don't really have an indication. And because going public about your refusal is so tough, that's why we hear so few of these voices. But there are many people, hundreds or thousands, that don't enlist and find their way to get different exemptions, and many of them do it for political reasons, but we'll never know that because they don't have the option to share it publicly because it could affect badly their family or their community. It could put them in danger. So I know personally, I have friends that didn't go to the army, that refused, but to found their way to get an exemption, and they couldn't afford to be public about it. So we're never going to know the real numbers.
It's very interesting.
I think it's really important to say how difficult it is to refuse right now, because and I think that maybe like we would wish to see more people questioning the Israeli narrative, but it's so hard when on the Israeli media you can see only one side, only the Israeli story. You need to work very hard to find alternative information. You're barely going to find anything in Hebrew, so you need to look up in English or in other languages and in other media sources that aren't the regular ones that when you open up TV. Gaza is seen only as the people of Gaza are portrayed, all of them, as Hamas warriors, and not and the humanitarian crisis is barely even talked about, and the numbers of the Palestinians that are being killed aren't really talked about. And I think that's a big reason why we don't see a big wave of public refusal, because it's so tough to refuse, and because we don't even have the information brought to us. We need to work very hard to find it.
Which is why people like you guys are very, very brave and have all our admiration. Thank you so much, Einat and Nave, for joining us here on the stream for this very important conversation. I'm sorry we're out of time. We could have been chatting for a few more hours, but thank you so much for taking part in the show today. And thank you all for watching the stream. Don't forget to keep the conversation going online. You can send us your comments, your questions. We always love to hear from you. For that, you can use the hashtag or the handle AJStream. Take care, and I'll see you soon.